Hey everyone, welcome to Hebraic Awakening. We are going to just have a little chit chat about our patriarch Moses or Moshe being our hybrid Messiah. So we do know that there are several Messiahs. However, as a messianic believer, I believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, right? So when we look at that name and we study it, we understand that it means to bring salvation. And Joseph brought a form of salvation, Moses brought a form of salvation, and so on to be saved from something. So, this is why I titled it The Hybrid Messiah. Why am I calling Moshe a hybrid? Well, during our midrash with our fellowship, we wanted to talk about how Moshe was brought up as an Egyptian, all right? From the time of 3 months old up until he was called to bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. He was an Egyptian, both culturally, right? He was in Egyptian in education and in thought. However, we do know that he did understand his Hebraic identity. All right. So we see that his adoptive mother brought in his birth mother to nurse him. So he was nursed at least up until 4 or 5 years old, if not longer. Okay. Back then, if not longer. But we know for sure he was nursed by his original blood mother. So we know that as he was being nursed, that she was pouring into him. And I personally believe that throughout his journey, when she could, she poured into Moshe. However, Moshe was an Egyptian through and through. He didn't really get a chance to know anything else. Let's think about this, critically think, because this is what we do when we midrash. We do stories, that we can connect to the passage. We just think of how we can, pull this into 2026, or just think about it and try to fill in those blanks that are not there. We are not trying to change Torah. We are not trying to come up with a different scenario. We are trying to kind of like fill in the blanks to the story. So that's why you also need to read historical books, right? I.e., Josephus. So if you haven't read Josephus' work, you might want to take a look at that because that helps to fill in the gaps. We also have the Book of Jubilees and so forth. So you have extra biblical books that was not, put into the canon for whatever reason. But we can use those books to kind of fill in the blanks. We may not ever know the full story until the Mashiach come and tell us, but we can kind of mid-rash or talk through, come up with different scenarios, pick apart the story, the event, and so on. So with that being said, Moshe is getting a top-notch education in Egyptian history, their culture, their language. He's getting the best education in science, the arts, mathematics, you name it. And we have to understand that at that time, Egypt was a powerhouse, one, if not the most powerful nation on the planet at that time. However, they were being weakened. Okay, they were being weakened by outside forces, such as the Canaanites, the Ethiopians. And history records Moses, according to Josephus, as a kind of like military strategist that helped to put together a plan of action to keep the Ethiopians off of the Egyptians' butt, so to speak, to keep them from invading. Egypt put a lot of emphasis on education and building a kingdom within itself. okay? But they were weak in infrastructure, and the nations around them knew it. So, according to history, Moshe was also a military strategist, leader, so to speak. I don't believe that he would have been in line to be the Pharaoh's successor because at that time, the Pharaoh's daughter, who was not named in scripture, but when you look at history, you will find her name, okay? But she was the only child to Pharaoh at that time, all right? So he did not have a successor. So my question was Pharaoh understood the dream, right, that he dreamed because he had the men come to interpret the dream. They already said that a Hebrew boy was going to rise up and take over Egypt and kill the leader and so on. And you see Pharaoh believed that because he had all of the male children, right, slaughtered. He wanted them out of here. So why would you bring this little Hebrew baby? It wasn't like she hid Moshe. It wasn't that he didn't know about Moshe. He knew, Egypt knew about Moshe. So why did Pharaoh, all right, keep him around? I don't know. We can mid-rash that. We can think that through that he thought maybe one day he could be a great right hand man, but not necessarily a pharaoh. Because he was groomed from a baby and he didn't have any cultural ties, so to speak, to his Hebrew identity, that he would be a great leader, not the pharaoh, but a great leader. I don't know, because I wouldn't trust. I wouldn't trust that little Hebrew baby at all. However, he did. And Moshe surely grew up to be that Hebrew man that took down Pharaoh and allowed the enslaved people of Israel to go. And I know they were not Israel at the time, they were Hebrews. So the enslaved Hebrews to go. All right. So Moshe is a hybrid leader, meaning that he's more Egyptian, right? Because of the way he was raised than he is in Hebrew. And we were talking, and I'm like, Moshe really had a very hard time with the Israelites because he was a hybrid. And I'm not going to use these other racial slurs that people call people of mixed descent, or you were born an African, but maybe you were raised in China, right? So you are Chinese. A lot of African Americans, they can't even compute that. But here we see that in scripture that you can be born in Hebrew, but be raised as an Egyptian. We saw that with Joseph as well, but he was not born into the Egyptian culture. He was captured as a slave, right? And he made his way up the ranks and became the governor to the Pharaoh at that time. But Moshe, 3 months in, he was pretty much raised from a baby. So, with that being said, the Most High calling him to come out of that identity that's the only identity that he really knew. I'm not saying that he did not know his Israelite identity. I am not saying that. But the Egyptian trumped that Israelite identity until the Most High called him out, until the Most High started placing things on his heart, in his mind, in how he made decisions. Because you see, he fought for his Hebrew brothers. He even killed an Egyptian. All right. So, with that being said, Moshe had a very hard time with the Israelites because you see throughout time that the Israelites will raise up on Moshe. It is really because they like, who you talking to? Like, you're not one of us. Not really. Okay, you might be born one of us, but you're really not one of us. And you see that throughout Moshe's life. And that the Most High had to, and I want to say had to, use a hybrid type of Messiah, or a hybrid type of leader to take the Israelites out of something that they had just got used to. They got used to Egyptian culture, the food, the way of life, the idol worship, even though they had their Hebraic traditions and customs. This was before the Torah was actually written down. We believe that the Torah had been given down to Adam all the way up until the time of Moshe. However, we were not a nation until later on in the game. And that's why when we look at our Torah, when we look at the first 5 books, people outside of the faith say that we stole a lot of other cultures' ways of living. And what they don't understand is that the Most High came first. That's just what I believe. Okay, the Most High came first. He is the creator of all things. So, with that being said, He established and put in the earth first the way to live. There was light, and not natural light, but there was the light of Torah established. All right. So, I believe that mankind can take the universal principles of the Most High and work them. So that means that some of the ways that the outsiders, okay, people who were outside of the Hebrews, some of the ways that they did things worked. And so the Most High used some of those ways that the Hebrews were already familiar with and that worked, and pulled it into the way that we were going to live amongst ourselves in the land. And we're talking about civil laws, right? He pulled from what they knew. Now, because we were not a nation until later on, a lot of people accuse, all right, the Hebrews of stealing certain ideologies from other nations. What they don't realize is that the Most High is using the things that were already established that were right. And those ideologies, unbeknownst to the pagan nations, some of the things that they were doing right were indeed from the instructions of Yah, even though it wasn't written down. Yahweh's principles, a lot of them are universal. So, in the heart of man, they can receive some of these universal principles and work them and have the fruit. But that don't mean that they belong to Yah himself. That means that they know how to work those principles. So with that being said, yes, some of our Mosaic laws, we call it the laws of Moshe. We know that's not true. We know that they belong to Yah. But you will see it written down, the Mosaic law. There's no such thing as the Mosaic law. It is the law of Yahweh himself. So a lot of things that is pulled through the law, a lot of civil right traditions and things of that nature seem familiar because they are. And we know because of careful study that that is how Yahweh does things. All right. So I want to make that clear. Uh, Moses is a hybrid leader who had to make a choice to come into his true identity, to help his people to become free. And he was a perfect candidate, so to speak, because he was so skilled in Egyptian culture and language, the arts, every nuance. He was the perfect person to help to bring his people out. He knew how to talk, and that's why he kept going before Pharaoh. Because I was like, there's no way Pharaoh was going to let anybody else like that come before him 11 times, keep telling him that he going to let these people go, and he not letting them go. And I really believe it is because Moshe had a lot of respect and honor amongst Egypt. All right. To this day, when you read about him, whether they agree that he was a spiritual person that brought the children of Israel out under the guise of Yahweh, historically, they know that he was a very important political figure. So Moshe had that juice. That's an old school terminology, but he had what it took to stand before Pharaoh. He had the respect and the honor, all right, to keep going back and forth to Pharaoh. So that brings me to the part of the midrash that we did. How do we apply that story to us? We are like Moshe. We are hybrids. A lot of us that have been scattered throughout the four corners of the earth are indeed hybrids. We may have Israelite blood, but we look, we talk, we're educated, culturally speaking, right? We wear our clothes like the land that we are living in. For me, I am in North America. So when I go amongst another nation, say the Egyptians, even though I may look like I could belong to the ancient tribes of Israel, my mannerisms, the way that I speak, how I think like a Western person, how I dress, looks more in line with the West. It is what it is. And it doesn't make you less than, just like Moshe was not less than. He was still a Hebrew through and through, even though he was raised and educated like an Egyptian. And so it is with us. We are hybrids. And I'm using that word on purpose because we are the epitome of what a dual citizen should look like. Anyway, we should be showing the world what a dual citizen looks like. Well, she is an American, right? She looks like an American by the way she dresses, whatever. She speaks like an American. However, her morals and her ethics, her code of conduct is very much in alignment with the Bible or the Hebrews. That is how we should be living our lives. And I did the video on how to fight like a viper because it's very important to understand that type of strategy, especially if you are a dual citizen. You must understand that strategy. That's the only way you're going to be as wise as a serpent and as harmless as doves, because you're going to have those nuances to go back and forth, not to be evil, but to understand how to be cunning, right? And we need to understand the differences. So we move like Moshe. We should allow ourselves to be educated and have businesses and learn the ways of the people that we are around in the lands that we live in for a reason. And it is to learn how to influence the system. And it's also for you to learn how to come out spiritually from the system. And we're talking about your spirit man, how to feed your spirit man the kingdom of Yahweh versus feeding your spirit man the economic system or the kingdom of America, if you will. And so those two things we need to learn how to do, just like Moshe had to learn how to do it. And it doesn't feel good, right? When you get ridiculed, like Moshe got ridiculed by the people, when people don't recognize you as a Hebrew, when people don't think you belong in the Israelite faith because you look different than what they want you to look. You speak different than what they want you to speak. They can't believe that you could be just like Moshe. It's very hard for people to understand that the whole 12 tribes, right, is not in one people group. They are not of all fit in the European Ashkenazi or Sephardic Jews for that matter. All 12 tribes can't fit in those people. Okay, so there has to be the other at least 10 tribes scattered. Now, we believe what we believe, and I'm not going to get into the arguments on whether the Ashkenazis are who they say. I don't care about that. I'm trying to understand who I am, right? And I'm trying to teach my bloodline who they are and to speak and to call out curses that follow my bloodline because we don't know who we are, because we don't understand Torah, because we are walking in disobedience. That's what I'm focused on. So y'all stay with me. Don't get in the comment section. And they not even the real. Please save it. We got bigger fish to fry, right? Because we have to come to understand that we are hybrid Israelites, just like Moshe, just like Joseph, and it's okay. So this is how we midrash our scriptures. On Patreon, I started a midrash section where we supposed to go back and forth. And what I find is that people, they just want to listen to what you have to say. They don't want to study. They don't want to take notes. They don't want to take notes. They don't want to read. And we were just discussing this morning with one of my friends. The people, what, are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, but you don't finish that sentence. It's not because you don't have the knowledge. That's not what that scripture says. It says because you reject Yahweh, you reject midrashing, you reject learning the language. Not that you have to speak it fluently, but at least learn the basics of the language, right? You don't want to learn traditions and rituals and customs because you're like, well, we know some traditions don't align with Torah, but as I said, neither did the Egyptian law, right? It did not align with Torah, but Moshe had to be what? Educated in it. You don't know how to even come against your enemy when you don't understand your enemy. That's why you need to be wise as a serpent. Okay, so I just wanted to have this little chit chat um, to just talk about how you should be midrashing the scriptures, how you should be in a safe space to have conversations, to ask those questions and not be made to feel stupid, right? Because the Most High going to give you the answer. He gives you wisdom as you ask for it. So I just wanted to chit chat with you all. Do not be afraid to be a hybrid Israelite. It's okay. Your forefathers were hybrids too.